I heard my husband whisper those words to someone in our bedroom, and in that single moment, 10 years of my life shattered like glass hitting concrete. I had just landed at Miami International after closing the Seattle deal a day early. The rain was coming down in sheets as I drove home to our Coral Gables condo, thinking about surprising Brett with the good news. For once, I wouldn't have to apologize for working late or missing dinner. For once, I could just be his wife instead of the woman paying all our bills. But when I pulled into our building's garage, I saw it. A cherry red Mustang in space B-15. The space I paid $1,200 a month for. My sister-in-law Sienna's car. My hands went cold on the steering wheel. Derek, my brother, was overseeing a construction site in Fort Lauderdale. So what was his wife doing at my place on a Tuesday afternoon? I took the elevator up with my heart hammering against my ribs, used my fingerprint to unlock the door silently. The apartment smelled like lavender and something else, something thick and wrong. I left my heels by the entrance and moved toward our bedroom on bare feet. The door was cracked open just enough, and what I heard through that gap destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and myself. This is going to be a long story, and I need you with me to tell it right. If you want to know how this ends, make sure you're following along, because you won't want to miss what comes next. Let me take you back to understand how I ended up standing in my own hallway, frozen like a stranger in my own home. I met Brett 12 years ago at a charity gala in South Beach. He was charming in that easy way some men are. Tall, with perfect teeth, and a law degree from a decent school. He told me he was building his practice, that he was this close to making partner at a mid-sized firm in Brickell. I was already climbing the ladder at a tech consulting company, pulling 70-hour weeks and loving every second of it. We got married fast. Too fast, probably. Within 8 months, I was wearing his ring and signing a lease on that Coral Gables apartment, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the bay that made my chest ache with pride every morning. But Brett's big break never came. His firm passed him over for partner once, then twice. He started talking about the politics of it all, how they were promoting people with connections instead of talent. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. So when he suggested he take some time to regroup, maybe work on building his own client base, I said yes. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of me waking up at 5 a.m. to catch flights to Portland, to Austin, to Chicago. 7 years of me sitting in airport lounges with my laptop, closing deals that kept us in that apartment, kept Brett's BMW in the garage, kept the bottle service flowing when we went out with friends. My salary doubled, then tripled. I made senior consultant, then principal, then partner. My bonus last year alone was more than Brett made in his best year at the firm. And Brett? He worked from home, said he was cultivating relationships, taking potential clients to lunch. I paid for those lunches. I paid for everything. But I told myself it was fine. Marriage was a partnership, right? Not everything had to be 50-50. He supported me emotionally. He was there when I came home exhausted. He made me laugh. Except somewhere along the way, he stopped making me laugh. Stopped touching me the way he used to. Started looking at his phone more than he looked at me. I buried myself deeper in work. Told myself it was just a phase, that all marriages went through rough patches. Standing in that hallway, listening to sounds coming from my bedroom that I hadn't heard in months, I realized how stupid I had been. I crept closer to the door. My heart was slamming so hard I thought they might hear it. Through the gap, I could see our bed, the gray linen sheets I had changed before leaving for Seattle. And there they were, Brett and Sienna, my husband and my brother's wife, tangled together in a way that made my stomach turn. But it was what Brett said that really cut me open. His voice was rough with pleasure, saying things about her body that he never said about mine anymore. Then he laughed, and I heard him tell her that I was so focused on work that I wouldn't notice if he paraded her through the living room naked. That I was convenient. A paycheck with benefits. That looking at me didn't even excite him anymore. Sienna giggled. That same light, bubbly laugh I had always thought was sweet. She said something about me being too serious, too cold. She wondered aloud if I even knew how to have fun anymore. I should have burst through that door, should have screamed, should have torn the sheets off them and made them face what they were doing. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and pressed record. I stood there for 2 full minutes, capturing everything. The sounds, the words, the betrayal. Because even with my world crumbling, the part of my brain that built a career on strategy was still working. And that part knew that emotion was temporary, but evidence was forever. When I had enough, I backed away carefully, put my heels back on, walked out of that apartment as quietly as I had entered it. I sat in my car in the garage for 20 minutes, staring at that red Mustang, watching the video on my phone over and over until the images burned into my brain. Then I started the engine and drove to Morgan's house in Coconut Grove. Morgan had been my best friend since college, and now she was one of the sharpest divorce attorneys in Miami. If anyone could tell me what to do next, it was her. Morgan watched the video twice without saying a word. When she finally looked up at me, her expression had gone from shock to something cold and calculating. She told me that if I confronted them now, I would lose. That Brett would spin it, make promises, beg forgiveness. That Sienna would cry and play victim. That my family would pressure me to forgive, to keep things quiet, to think about Derek's feelings. And in the chaos of all that emotion, Brett would have time to hide assets, to protect himself. She said I needed to be smart, patient, that I needed to let them think they were safe while I built an airtight case. So that's what I did. I went home that night with fresh makeup covering my red eyes. Brett was in the living room, showered and casual, watching basketball like it was any other Tuesday. When he saw me, his face did this weird thing where panic flashed for just a second before smoothing into a smile. He asked about my trip, said he was glad I was home early. Then he launched into this elaborate story about how Sienna had stopped by because she needed help with a plumbing issue and Derek was unreachable. He had helped her fix it, but in the process, he had spilled coffee all over our bed sheets and had to change them. I nodded, said that was sweet of him to help, kissed him on the cheek. It took everything in me not to vomit. Over the next week, I started digging. I told Brett I needed to organize our finances for tax season and asked for access to all our accounts. He gave me everything without hesitation, probably because he thought I was too busy to actually look closely. He was wrong. I spent my nights after he fell asleep going through bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts, and what I found made the affair look like a minor offense. Brett had been draining our joint savings, not just a little here and there. Systematic withdrawals over the past 18 months. $50,000 was gone. Money I had earned, that I had saved, that was supposed to be our future. I tracked the transactions. Jewelry purchases at high-end stores in Bal Harbor. Weekend getaways to Key West that he had told me were fishing trips with old law school buddies. Payments to a real estate management company for a property I had never heard of. It took me 3 days to find it. A condo in Wynwood. A trendy one-bedroom that Brett had purchased under an LLC. My husband, who couldn't hold down a job, had used my money to buy a love nest for him and my sister-in-law. I sat in my home office at 2 a.m, staring at the property records, feeling something dark and cold settle into my chest where panic used to be. Morgan had told me to be patient, to gather evidence, to build a case so strong that Brett would have nowhere to run. But sitting there, looking at proof that my husband had stolen from me to fund his affair with my brother's wife, I realized something else. I didn't just want a divorce. I wanted them to burn. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was pretending I didn't know. I had to keep showing up to family dinners at my parents' house in Pinecrest, sitting across from Sienna while she played the devoted wife to my brother. I had to smile at her compliments about my hair, about my career success, about how lucky Brett was to have such an ambitious wife. Every word out of her mouth was poison wrapped in sugar. Derek would sit there, oblivious, talking about the projects his construction company was landing. He adored Sienna, called her his princess, bragged about surprising her with weekend trips and spa days. I wondered how many of those trips happened while Brett was conveniently out of town on his supposed networking events. My mother kept pushing me to spend more time with Sienna, said we should be closer since we were sisters-in-law. She suggested we do a girls' day, get our nails done, maybe go shopping. I agreed. Took Sienna to lunch at a bistro in Coral Gables the following Saturday. We sat on the patio under white umbrellas, and I watched her pick at a salad while going on about how hard marriage was, how Derek worked too much, how she sometimes felt lonely. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I asked her if she ever thought about what she would do if Derek cheated on her. Just casual conversation over white wine. Her face went pale for a moment. Then she recovered, said she would leave him immediately, that she could never forgive that kind of betrayal, that loyalty was everything. I smiled and agreed, raised my glass to loyalty. What she didn't know was that I had hired a private investigator 3 days earlier, a retired FBI agent named Marcus who specialized in infidelity cases. I had given him the video, the financial records, everything I had found, and I told him I needed more. Marcus delivered. He tracked Brett's movements for 2 weeks and confirmed what I already knew. Brett met Sienna every Tuesday and Thursday at the Wynwood condo, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for the entire afternoon. He photographed them going in together, coming out separately, documented their routine with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. But Marcus found something else. Something I hadn't been looking for. Brett had been meeting with someone at a law office in downtown Miami, a family attorney who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. My husband was planning to divorce me. He just wanted to do it strategically, timing it right to maximize what he could take. The consultation notes that Marcus somehow obtained were surgical in their detail. Brett had told the attorney that he had sacrificed his career to support mine, that he deserved compensation for the opportunities he had given up, that he was entitled to alimony, to half of everything I had built. He was going to play the victim, the supportive husband who put his dreams on hold for his wife's success. I read those notes in my car outside a client meeting in Tampa, and something inside me snapped into perfect clarity. Brett wasn't just a cheater, he was a con artist, and I had been his mark for 7 years. That night, I changed tactics. I started documenting everything in reverse. I pulled employment records showing that Brett had been fired from his firm, not passed over for partner. That his own incompetence and laziness had ended his career, not corporate politics. I gathered evidence of every lie he had told me over the years, every fake business lunch that was really a matinee with Sienna, every supposed client meeting that was actually him day drinking at bars in South Beach. Morgan helped me create a timeline, a forensic breakdown of our marriage that showed exactly who had contributed what. My salary history, my tax returns, proof that every single asset we owned had been purchased with my income. But I still played the loving wife at home, still kissed Brett goodnight, still asked about his day, and pretended to believe his answers. Because I was learning something valuable about revenge. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and patient. It was about letting your enemy relax, letting them think they had gotten away with it, and then striking when they least expected it. 2 weeks after my lunch with Sienna, my mother called to invite us to a family barbecue. She said it was important, that she had some news to share. I showed up in a sundress with homemade potato salad, playing the part perfectly. Brett was charming, helping Derek set up the grill, laughing at my father's jokes. Sienna was quiet, I noticed. She kept looking at her phone, kept touching her stomach. My mother made the announcement over burgers and beer. She and my father were renewing their vows for their 30th anniversary. Big celebration. All family invited. She wanted it to be perfect. Everyone cheered, made toasts, talked about love and commitment. And that's when Sienna excused herself and ran to the bathroom. I found her there 20 minutes later, sitting on the floor with her back against the tub, mascara running down her face. She looked up at me with these desperate eyes and said she needed to tell me something, that she couldn't hold it in anymore. I knelt down next to her, put my hand on her shoulder, and waited. She told me she was pregnant. Sienna's pregnancy changed everything. She sat on that bathroom floor and told me the baby was Derek's, that she was about 8 weeks along, that she was terrified because things between them had been rough lately. She asked me not to say anything yet. She needed time to figure out how to tell him. I held her while she cried, rubbed her back and made soothing sounds, told her everything would be okay. I didn't mention that I had seen her calendar sync to the cloud, that I knew she had been tracking her cycle, that 8 weeks ago she had been with Brett 3 times in 1 week. The math was ugly, but it was there. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel, mind racing. If Sienna was pregnant with Brett's baby, everything got infinitely more complicated. Derek would be destroyed. My parents would be devastated. The family would implode. But more than that, it gave me leverage I hadn't expected. I called Morgan the next morning from my office, door locked, voice low. She listened to everything, and then went silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, she told me this was actually good news. That pregnancy meant desperation. Desperate people made mistakes, and mistakes were what I needed to close the trap. I asked her what she meant. She said I needed to make Brett panic, make him think Sienna was going to tell Derek everything, make him scramble, because when people scramble, they leave evidence behind. So I started planting seeds. I mentioned to my mother that Sienna seemed stressed lately, suggested she might be having problems with Derek. My mother, ever the concerned parent, called Sienna to check in. That conversation led to Sienna admitting to my mother that she and Derek had been fighting more, that she felt disconnected from him. My mother, trying to help, told Derek he needed to pay more attention to his wife. Derek, feeling attacked, got defensive, started watching Sienna more closely, started asking questions about where she was going, who she was seeing. The pressure was building. Meanwhile, I started being extra affectionate with Brett, surprised him with his favorite dinners, suggested we take a weekend trip to the Keys, just the 2 of us, to reconnect. He looked terrified every time I suggested couple time, made excuses about work commitments that didn't exist, started sleeping in the guest room, claiming his back was acting up. I could see him unraveling, and it was beautiful. Then Marcus called with information that made my entire strategy snap into place. He had been following Sienna for the past week, and she had made 3 trips to a clinic in Coral Gables, not her regular OB/GYN, a private clinic that specialized in discreet services. Marcus had talked to a nurse who worked there, learned that Sienna had been asking about paternity testing, about how early it could be done, whether it was safe, whether the results could be kept confidential. She knew the baby might not be Derek's, and she was trying to find out before anyone else could. I sat with that information for 2 days, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit yet. Then I realized what I needed to do. I sent an anonymous message to the clinic, posing as a concerned friend, saying that Sienna's husband Derek needed to know about her visits, that he had a right to know what was happening with his wife's pregnancy. The clinic, bound by confidentiality, couldn't tell Derek anything, but they did call Sienna to warn her that someone was asking questions. Sienna panicked, called Brett 37 times in one afternoon. I know because I had installed tracking software on our family phone plan, something Brett had agreed to years ago when he said it was for safety. I could see every call, every text, every moment of their desperation. Brett finally called her back from a coffee shop 3 blocks from our apartment. They talked for 42 minutes. I couldn't hear what they said, but I didn't need to. Their call logs told me everything. That night, Brett came home looking like he hadn't slept in days. He poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and drank it standing at the kitchen counter. I asked him if everything was okay. He said work was stressful. that he was dealing with a difficult client situation. I nodded, kissed his cheek, told him I loved him. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but I smiled through it, because I had just gotten the call I had been waiting for. The one from Marcus telling me that Sienna and Brett had agreed to meet, not at the Wynwood condo. Somewhere public this time. Somewhere they felt safe. The Lotus Lounge, a trendy bar in Brickell with private booths and dim lighting. They had a reservation for Saturday night at 8. I marked it on my calendar with a little star. Saturday night was going to change everything. I spent the week before Saturday preparing like I was going into battle. Morgan helped me organize every piece of evidence into a timeline that could destroy Brett in court. Bank statements showing the systematic theft. Property records for the Wynwood condo. Photos from Marcus documenting every meetup. The video from that first day. Proof of Brett's lies about his career, his income, his contributions to our marriage. But more than that, I needed witnesses. I needed Derek to see what his wife had become. Needed him to catch them together in a way that left no room for excuses or explanations. The hard part was that Derek didn't deserve this pain. He had been a good brother to me. Loyal. Protective. When I was building my career and working insane hours, he was the one who checked on me, who made sure I was eating, who reminded me that I was more than my job. Breaking his heart was going to hurt me almost as much as Brett's betrayal had. But there was no other way. I crafted the message carefully, sent it to Derek from an anonymous number on Friday night, 24 hours before the meeting. The text was simple. Your wife is meeting someone at Lotus Lounge tomorrow night at 8 p.m., booth 7. You should be there. I didn't sign it, didn't explain, just planted the seed and waited. Derek called me within an hour, voice tight with confusion, asked if I had gotten any weird messages, if I knew anything about Sienna acting strange. I played dumb, said Sienna had seemed fine at Mom's barbecue, asked if everything was okay between them. He said he didn't know anymore, that Sienna had been distant, that he kept catching her on her phone at odd hours, that when he asked about the pregnancy, she would change the subject or start crying. I told him to trust his gut, that if something felt wrong, it probably was. He thanked me and hung up. I sat in my dark living room with Brett snoring in the guest room, and I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle over me like a heavy blanket. Saturday arrived with gray skies and the kind of humidity that made the air feel thick. Brett was jumpy all day. He showered twice, changed his shirt 3 times, said he was meeting an old colleague for drinks to discuss a potential job opportunity. I told him that sounded promising, asked which colleague. He stammered out a name I had never heard before. I smiled and said I hoped it went well. At 7:30, I watched him leave the apartment in dark jeans and the shirt I had bought him for his birthday. The one Sienna had once said made his eyes look good. I waited 15 minutes. Then I got in my car and drove to Brickell. Marcus was already in position across the street from Lotus Lounge, camera ready. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the drizzle that had started to fall. The air smelled like wet concrete and something ending. I texted Derek at 7:55. Are you coming? He responded immediately. On my way. Traffic. I could picture him white-knuckling the steering wheel, jaw clenched, hoping the anonymous message was wrong, hoping his wife wasn't the person he was starting to fear she was. Through the window of Lotus Lounge, I could see Brett and Sienna in booth 7. They were arguing. Even from outside, I could read the tension in their body language. Sienna was crying. Brett was leaning forward, hands gestures sharp and angry. This wasn't a romantic meetup. This was a crisis meeting. At 8:15, Derek's truck pulled up to the curb with a screech. He jumped out without even closing the door properly, rain soaking his t-shirt as he stalked toward the entrance. I followed him inside, heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The hostess tried to stop Derek, but he brushed past her. I was right behind him, close enough to see everything, far enough to stay out of the immediate blast zone. Derek walked straight to booth 7. I watched my brother's face as he registered what he was seeing. His wife. his best friend's wife's husband. Together. Alone. Sienna's hand on Brett's arm. The intimacy of their positioning even in anger. The color drained from Derek's face. Then it came back in a rush of red rage. Derek's voice cut through the low music and conversation like a blade. He demanded to know what was happening, why his wife was here with my husband, why they were holding hands across a table in a dark booth while he was home thinking she was at her sister's place in Kendall. Sienna's face went white. She started stammering something about it not being what it looked like, about Brett just helping her with something private. Brett jumped in, tried to play it smooth, started spinning a story about Sienna needing legal advice about a family matter she didn't want Derek to worry about. That's when I stepped out of the shadows. The look on Brett's face when he saw me was worth every sleepless night I had endured. Pure, absolute terror. I walked up to that booth with my phone in my hand and my lawyer right behind me. Morgan had arrived through the back entrance, briefcase in hand, looking like the professional executioner she was. I told Derek I was sorry, that I should have told him sooner, that I had wanted to give him the truth with evidence instead of just accusations. Then I showed him the video. Derek watched 30 seconds before he shoved my phone away. But it was enough. More than enough. Sienna started crying, reaching for Derek, trying to explain. She claimed it was a mistake, that it had only happened once, that she loved Derek, and the baby was definitely his. I corrected her on that last part. Told Derek about the clinic visits, about the paternity test questions, about the 8-week timeline that lined up perfectly with Brett and Sienna's most frequent meetings. Derek looked at Sienna like he was seeing a stranger. Asked her if it was true. She couldn't answer. Just kept crying and saying she was sorry. Brett, backed into a corner, did what cowards do. He tried to shift blame. Said I had pushed him away with my obsession with work. That I had made him feel worthless and invisible. That Sienna had just been there when he needed someone. I let him finish his pathetic speech. Then I pulled out the folder Morgan had prepared, dropped it on the table in front of him. Inside was everything. Bank statements showing the $50,000 he had stolen, property records for the condo he had bought with my money, employment records proving he had lied about being fired, screenshots of messages between him and his divorce attorney plotting to take me for everything I had. I told him I had filed for divorce that morning, that I had already moved our assets into accounts he couldn't touch, that the Wynwood condo was being seized as marital property obtained through fraud, that I had reported the theft to the police and my attorney was pressing charges. Brett's face went from red to gray. He started trying to negotiate, saying we could work this out, that we didn't need to involve lawyers or police. I told him we were way past that. Sienna, still crying, turned to Derek and begged him to understand. Said she had made a mistake, but that she loved him. That they could get through this together. Derek's laugh was bitter and broken. He told her to save it, that he wanted a paternity test the moment the baby was born. That if it wasn't his, she was on her own. If it was his, they would co-parent, but their marriage was done. Then he looked at Brett with something dark and dangerous in his eyes. He told Brett that if he ever saw him again, at family events or anywhere else, he would make him regret it. That Brett had destroyed 2 families and betrayed the one person who had carried him for years. Brett tried to respond, but Derek cut him off, said he wasn't worth the words. Then my brother walked out of that bar into the rain, and I knew he would never be quite the same. I stayed long enough to watch Brett and Sienna sit in that booth, the weight of their choices crushing down on them. They had thought they were so clever, thought they could have their affair and their security, thought I was too stupid or too busy to notice. They had underestimated me completely. Morgan handed Sienna a card, told her she would need her own attorney because Derek was filing for divorce too, that she should get one sooner rather than later because this was going to get ugly. Then we left them there, 2 people who had destroyed their lives for stolen moments in a condo bought with someone else's money. Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. I stood on the sidewalk, letting it soak through my jacket, feeling something crack open inside my chest. It wasn't triumph exactly. It was more like release. Marcus pulled up in his car and rolled down the window, told me he had gotten everything on camera, every moment of the confrontation, every word, every tear. I thanked him and said I'd be in touch about final payment. Then I walked to my car alone and sat in the driver's seat, watching water stream down the windshield. I had just blown up my marriage, my brother's marriage, and my family's peace. But I had also reclaimed something I didn't even realize I had lost: my dignity, my truth, my right to be seen as more than a paycheck. The hardest part was just beginning. 3 months after that night at Lotus Lounge, I signed the final divorce papers in Morgan's office. Brett got nothing. The judge had reviewed our evidence and determined that his theft of marital funds and fraudulent financial behavior disqualified him from any claim to alimony or asset division. He walked away with his personal belongings and the debt from the legal fees he couldn't afford. Last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment in Hialeah, working at a mall kiosk selling phone cases. The law firms in Miami had blacklisted him once word got out about what he had done. Turns out, stealing from your wife and lying about your employment history doesn't make you very hireable. Sienna had the baby, a girl. The paternity test came back showing Derek was the father, which gave him some small comfort. But he filed for full custody and won. Sienna's affair and instability during pregnancy worked against her. She gets supervised visitation every other weekend. She moved back in with her parents, works part-time at a boutique in Aventura. Her Instagram, which used to be full of luxury vacation photos and designer bags, is private now. Derek and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. It took him a while to forgive me for how I handled things, for not telling him sooner. But eventually, he admitted that if I had just told him without proof, he might not have believed it. Some betrayals are so massive that people need to see them to accept they're real. He's dating someone new, a teacher from Coral Springs who has never met Brett and doesn't care about expensive dinners or status symbols. She makes him laugh in a way I haven't heard in years. My parents struggled the most. My mother cried for weeks, couldn't understand how this had happened under her nose, how her son-in-law and daughter-in-law had been carrying on while sitting at her dinner table, eating her food, accepting her love. My father was quieter about it, but he pulled me aside one day and told me he was proud of how I handled it, that taking the high road didn't mean being a doormat, that protecting yourself wasn't selfish. As for me, I sold the Coral Gables apartment. Couldn't sleep there anymore without seeing ghosts in every corner. I bought a smaller place in Coconut Grove right near Morgan. It's just me and a rescue dog named Apollo, who sleeps at the foot of my bed and doesn't care how much money I make. Work is good. Better than good. The company promoted me to senior partner. I'm leading the West Coast expansion now, which means travel, but it's different this time. I'm doing it for me, building something that's mine alone. I started therapy too. Spent a lot of sessions unpacking why I ignored the signs for so long, why I prioritized being Brett's safety net over being my own advocate. My therapist asked me once what I had learned from all of this. I told her I learned that love without respect is just another form of using someone. That forgiveness doesn't mean staying, that the person who carries everyone else still needs someone to carry them sometimes. And I learned that betrayal, as much as it destroys, also clarifies. It shows you who people really are when they think no one is watching. The truth is, I didn't lose 10 years of my life to Brett. I invested them in learning exactly who I am and what I'm worth. And what I'm worth isn't measured by how much I earn or how much I give. It's measured by how I stand back up after someone tries to break me. Sometimes I think about that Tuesday afternoon when I came home early and heard those words through the bedroom door. How that single moment split my life into before and after. I used to wish I could go back and unknow what I learned that day. Now, I'm grateful for it. Because the woman who walked into that apartment is not the same woman who walked out. She's stronger, wiser, and she belongs entirely to herself. If you're listening to this from somewhere in the world, where you're feeling trapped, where someone is making you feel small or invisible, or like you're only valuable for what you provide, I need you to hear this. You are not crazy for feeling something is wrong. Trust that instinct. Document everything. Find someone who will believe you and help you plan. And when you're ready, when you have all your evidence and your ducks in a row, take your life back. Because you deserve to be someone's priority, not their convenience. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. I've got more stories to tell about women who refuse to stay silent. Until next time, remember, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so completely yourself that their betrayal becomes just a footnote in your story.